From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast.
The fastest growing entertainment phenomenon of this generation.
I, Prophet of Esports, joined today by my friend and co-host William Collis.
Yeah, we got the book of esports out. It's a big deal.
So everyone knows me as the Prophet and William as the Professor.
They may call me the Prophet, but in my life outside of the business of esports, I have worked on the investment side of the table for the better part of the last 2 decades. The single fastest growing area of gaming and esports is gambling. It's booming right now. You don't need to be a prophet like me to see that. However, as an investor, I've stayed away from gambling and betting companies because of the reputational risk and often shady nature of the companies involved. This was true until now. I've recently bought stock in a new public company called Esports Entertainment Group, or EEG, which is focused on esports and gambling. The big difference that changed my mind is that EEG is a public company, NASDAQ listed, and fully regulated, focused on esports betting. The regulatory and audit requirements of a public company are key in my mind to provide the needed transparency for players, bettors, and investors. I had an opportunity to host the CEO of EEG on this podcast a couple of months ago, and I was very impressed by his vision for the company. We've stayed in touch, and I'm delighted to announce that they've accepted to become a sponsor of the podcast. If you're a family office, institutional investor, or investor of any kind, really, Esports Entertainment Group, ticker symbol GAMBLE, GMBL, might be one of the best ways to get exposure to the esports betting space and gaming in general. Make sure to check them out at esportsentertainmentgroup.com. Having said that, I need to make sure to state that this is only my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor or selling stock in the company. Please make sure you do your own research and seek advice from a licensed professional if you're looking to invest in the field. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast. I am Paul Doalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, William Collis. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do here is we cover the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for all the love. Thank you for the 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you for buying stuff, buying our merch like shirts and hoodies and socks and all the fun stuff that we sell. If you haven't already, go buy William's book, The Book of Esports. If you have bought the book, and I know many of you have, go leave a review. Go on Amazon, type a few words. You literally can be 1 sentence, 2 sentences, what you thought of the book. I know everyone, at least that I've spoken to who's bought the book, has really enjoyed it. And I know so many of you haven't left a review yet. So please go do that. William, how's it going? How was your week?
Oh, it's going incredibly well, Paul. It's always a great week when you and I get to sit down and do the podcast. I'm so excited. And we have some fun topics this week. We got some fun ones. And it's just me and you, or you and I. So we get to focus and go in depth with our opinions and shout over each other and all the good stuff. So
you know what's weird, William, is that we do this podcast every single Wednesday, right? We record
Yes.
it.
Yep. Every Wednesday is our recording
and
day.
it feels almost like this is either like the capstone on the week, or it's like the beginning of the week. To me, it's weird that it falls in the middle of our busy week, right? Like, because it sometimes feels like this should be the end, and we're just like, now we get to just chat and have fun and or the beginning, and this is how we kick off our week. But it's always in the middle. I don't know why we chose to do it this way.
I don't know. I think it's the news cycle, maybe. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
I will say I definitely feel like our live stream, feels like an end of a week activity. So if you are listening to the podcast and you ever stop by the live stream, every Wednesday night starting at 8:30 EST. You can find us. We live stream to sort of all the major channels, but you got us on LinkedIn, YouTube, basically everywhere. But it's really fun. Stop by. There's a ton of content we cover that's not usually covered on the main podcast. A ton of more great guests and people stop in, and it's just live streams very, very fun. So if if you haven't checked that out and you enjoyed the podcast, definitely worth a look. You won't regret it.
And although it's just you and me today, William, I will say we have some huge guests coming on the show.
Don't tease it, Paul.
I have to tease it. I'm not even going to say who. I'm just saying part of why is we've been working on some massive gets, people who have not even appeared on other shows, or anywhere else really, and I think people are gonna have a lot of fun with these.
The tier is high. This is definitely something you bid all. These are definitely guests you bid all your DKP for. Is that reaching pretty deep?
It's too deep. I haven't played WoW in I don't know, a year and a half now.
I dropped the WoW references in for you. I'm not a WoW player. I just know DKP roll loot /roll. Let's go.
It's because I'm now watching all the people playing. Activision Blizzard's amazing. How many times have we talked about it? But they're re-releasing Burning Crusade.
Of course.
Classic.
Why would you not?
So what was WoW Classic, and I thought it was just going to be the original, expansions before Burning Crusade that people could have a little sort of nostalgia trip with. Now it seems like they're re-releasing every single expansion. And
then they're going to be able to do return. Then they're going to do WoW Classic too. Like they're going to get to run it back it's the gift that keeps on giving. WoW's an incredible feat. But I do think there's limits to these strategies, but we don't know what they are yet. And I would be very surprised if a bunch of people didn't line up to rebuy Burning Crusade,
Well, it's a bit of a sore spot for me, William, this whole thing of DKP, because now I'm getting messages from my old guild of people saying, "Oh, you should see who got this item or that item," stuff that I was probably in line for myself, being the top mage among all classic servers.
You were a mage. I was a mage too in WoW. How have we not talked about maging together?
I've always played either a mage or a paladin. And
were you
paladins
human?
in classic
what were you?
Suck.
What
I was
were
human,
you?
Yeah.
I was a human mage too, man.
Because the gear looks better on a human, even though the gnome racials are a little bit better.
Such a suboptimal choice. Human awareness or whatever. It's just like it does basically nothing.
You get the reputation bonus though, and that helps. You do some of the tough rep grinds.
The rep bonus matters. Yeah. All right. Okay. Enough. Sorry. This isn't a WoW podcast. If you guys like this though, we did this because the live stream goes there. So if you thought this banter was adorable, first of all, I thank you. My wife wouldn't think it's adorable, but second of all, stop by the live stream because there's a lot more stuff like this, still business stuff, but a lot more casual stuff too. But I guess now on to the business stuff.
William. And there's so many big stories this week. Let's start with 100 Thieves. And 100 Thieves was in the news here. The headline, this was their direct press release. 100 Thieves elevates, I guess it's Rochelle, Valkyrae, Hofstetter, and Jack Courage Dunlop to the ownership group. Premium lifestyle and gaming organization founded by Matthew Nadeshot Haig for creators by creators, sets the stage for its next phase of growth. The star content creators join Nadeshot, Drake, media mogul Scooter Braun, and Cleveland Cavaliers owner Dan Gilbert in the ownership group. I would love to have media mogul in front of my name just every time I'm quoted. I mean, that's nice. Even Drake didn't get something. It was not Grammy winning Drake.
Even Drake's left out there, but Scooter Braun gets media mogul. Maybe that's it's a little tough.
Tough for Drake there. This is what there's nothing more to this story really, William, other than that. They've been made co-owners of 100 Thieves. How much equity they have, we don't know. What the terms of the deal are, we don't know. But they are obviously very significant content creators. Everyone knows Courage and Valkyrae. Valkyrae, other than Pokimane, maybe the top female streamer. I think she actually is the top one right now. What do you make it? Is there anything to be read into this? I feel like this got a ton of play, and I didn't fully understand why.
Well, there's two reasons why I want to talk about the story. One is, first of all, we should say we don't know what they got, what it means to be an owner, right? So
Yep.
there's a lot of speculation here. But the interesting thing you see here that you don't really see this in other creative industries, right? That these individuals start, and I mean, Paul, you're giving me a face like, what are you talking about? But like, let's use sports teams, right? Like,
Yep.
you don't typically see star athletes on a sports team elevated to ownership. Now, maybe there are very rare circumstances later in life when they're very valuable and but typically it's sort of more like there's a clear line there, right? Similarly, with movie studios, you don't often see major actors becoming co-owners in movie studios. Now, again, there are things they do create their own studios and do self-finance projects and things, but generally the line between participant and sort of like management ownership is starker in other creative industries. And the interesting thing here is this is where you would sort of expect me to say something like, well, esports is, what are they doing? But it's sort of interesting because why should you have a line that's that stark, right? Like, why shouldn't you have, this sort of opportunity available to clearly heavy hitters, right? Who are bringing a lot to the organization. So I don't know. I'm sort of a mind that like, it's interesting. It's also problematic because, can you go down this route forever, right? Like, at what point do you stop and, call a line here? And also, at what point is it, creating real opportunities to double dip on the part of people who, are creating for the org? So it raises a lot of questions, but I think it's very interesting. I also think it speaks to the fact that, there's also a challenge, I think, in retaining some of this talent, right? Like, it's very easy. Like, the loyalty is to Valkyrae and Courage and not necessarily to 100 Thieves. So it reflects, I think, an increasing power in esports with the content creators. Those were the two things reasons why I thought this story was interesting, sort of highlighted those themes. What do you think, Paul?
I love that you went there, William, because it's this is why I love this podcast, right? We both look at the same story and can have two radically different views that sort of come to the same conclusion, right? Which is your view was, this doesn't happen very often in sports. It doesn't happen very often in entertainment. Mm-hmm. And I looked at this and I went, you know what? This happens all the time in business, period, right? like every startup I've ever built, right? My key employees, my superstars, I give them equity.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, this is not groundbreaking. It's been done in tech startups for the last 3 decades, right? Like, this is very standard fare in terms of keeping your best employees motivated, keeping the incentives aligned, like you said, helping to retain talent in a competitive environment, which, tech is, esports is, gaming is, all these, if you have a superstar programmer and you're a startup, at any point in time, Google can come poach them. Amazon can come poach them. Facebook can come poach them to keep them incented, to keep them there, to keep them loyal, to keep them excited about what they're doing every day. Equity is just like part of the game. And so to me, this is why I was like a little bit surprised when I saw this story, because I was like, so what? I mean, they have 2 superstar employees and they're giving them some equity. This feels like business 101.
It's so interesting because you guys we go to totally different places here. But let's separate the play the story has gotten from the underlying news and theme, right? Because the play the story has gotten is definitely because of the names in the story, right? It's.
But don't you think it would be weird if I announced that I was giving equity to 2 of my employees in a press release? Like,
well, but it's also
they're not Nate Shot. They're not
But it's celebrities. Celebrity as a class are treated differently. Just like it's a big deal when a celebrity invests in a company and that gets announced in a different way versus just a regular venture round. So, but yeah, I take the point. I mean, it also feels like, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think I've seen a lot of 100 Thieves news recently. Right. Maybe I'm wrong on that front, but I think part of this too might be, news cycle management, right? Like, hey, we haven't been in the press for a while. What do we have on the docket that somebody might want to cover? Let's call up our PR firm and run through the options. Oh, this is the best we have. All right, ship it. It's still pretty good. We'll see if anyone gets a bite. There's a lot of that element to it too. Like, let's be honest. This isn't like Wins World Championship or unveils new, roster or right. Like it's a very functional piece of news.
But they didn't invest, right? And this is why I think it's sort of non-news, right? We wouldn't do a news like this if this press release was Courage and Valkyrae get salary increases, right? We'd probably laugh at it. Right?
Yeah.
So why is this news? Because fundamentally, yes, they became owners, and it's a bit of FaZe Clan syndrome, I think, where everyone and their dog is an owner or a founder. And I have a funny feeling 100 Thieves may go down that path of let's give 2 shares to anything that moves, and then everyone's an owner, and so everyone can put it on their LinkedIn, and so 100 Thieves starts to feel really big. I mean, FaZe has done this. There are people that I see on LinkedIn who put FaZe owner, and I'm like, I've never even heard of this person.
Yeah. Well.
And so there's a little bit of this playing, I think, too. Whereas in most circumstances, this would never have been news. This would never have been announced, really, unless Courage or Valkyrae, wrote a check.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting. But I go back to more and more. The other trend I see here is esports organizations getting better at news cycle management, right? Like as the industry matures, because these are filler stories, let's be honest. They're things you do to stay in cadence around other things. And that's a pretty mature thing to do and we didn't get these sorts of filler stories, 4 years ago, right? Like it reflects a sophistication on the part of the entities that are playing in esports and how they're choosing to engage, both the press, the news cycle, and continue to manage investor expectations, right? Because a big piece of this is every time you get a news article, it's something you can ship to an investor, and say, hey, look, here's X million impressions. And so it is interesting, but it also reflects, like I said, I think there's a positive sign here too, which is a sophistication. We're reading a lot into a little article here, but it's a fun one to lead off with because there's a lot of tea leaves you can divine if there's an interest,
William, let's move on. There was another big story this week. I'm not even going to put it up on the screen because we actually talked about it on a previous podcast.
Oh, is this one where we're totally right? Sorry.
Yeah, right. So we talked about this rumor that Epic Games was raising $1 billion round. Turns out they are raising $1 billion round. We were right about it. They closed the round. It's a $29 billion valuation, which, by the way, William, I don't know if you have a theory, but every single gaming and esports company, the magic number seems to be 30 billion. Like Roblox went out at 30 billion. Unity went out at 30 billion. Epic's now 30 billion. Skills, I think, went out at 30 billion. Like 30 billion seems to be the magic number.
So funny.
And there's another one that was announced recently that's now escaping me, where the IPO was set at about a $30 billion valuation, assuming it goes public at the price that they're expecting. Anyway, so Epic raises this $1 billion round. It's, again, sort of non-news because we discussed it and we discussed the implications. I would just say that the press release was very funny, all about the metaverse again. This is the 12,000 mentions of the metaverse. And they've done this in the context of Apple, obviously, breathing down their necks, and this lawsuit's still not settled. But what was fascinating was another story that sort of went along with this fundraising round. And I'll just put it up here. The headline was, Epic Games lost almost 181 million and 273 million on Epic Games Store in 2019 and 2020, respectively. Obviously, Epic Games Store has not been profitable those 2 years. Epic expects the store to turn a profit in 2023. They have 160 million registered users, 56 million monthly active. And look, there was another article where basically the headline was, actually, I don't know why this is not working, but the headline on this other article was, Epic CEO Tim Sweeney is very excited about the Epic Games Store losing a ton of money because he had tweeted to someone who was complaining about it. He wrote, "That's right, and it has proven to be a fantastic success in reaching gamers with great games and a fantastic investment into growing the business." So it was a bit of an aggressive reply on his part, right? He didn't like that people were saying Epic is losing a bunch of money on Epic Games Store.
Yeah, but I think he's kind of right here, Paul. I mean, obviously he's putting a braver face. You'd obviously rather have made money than lost money, right? But you had to know going into this thing, it was an incredibly competitive market, right? You had to know that you have to spend to get share in a market like this. And you have to know you have two primary levers, to acquire share through spend. One is price reduction, like artificial price reductions, so your product is the cheapest. And then the other is exclusives, right? Which fundamentally is also sort of a form of price reduction or, subsidization, in the sense that you're going to have to pay the developer there too. So you're kind of subsidized. It's like a direct payment to the studio or what have you, but it's effectively, it's making up for units they might otherwise get on another platform, right? So, they have to lose a ton of money on this. Right? Like, I think that's the first piece. And by the way, like, lots of great platform businesses hemorrhage money for, forever. Look at Amazon, right? Like, Amazon's the textbook example of, well, once we have the market cornered, look what we can do. So be quiet and get along for the ride. We're about to burn some dollar bills. So I don't think there's anything wrong with them losing money in this hyper competitive market that they're in right now. The question that I have about this is a little bit more down the line view, right? Which is, so you're spending all of this really to go against Steam. Let's be honest. Like, it's really to go against Steam, right? What does this mean, and what does the spend look like in the context of Amazon coming in with an aggressive game store strategy, right? Of other publishers coming in with aggressive game store strategies? Like, how much, like, I'm sure these losses look good in terms of carving market share away from Steam, right? But do they look good in terms of the future fragmentation of the industry? Because I think this is an industry that could very easily get more and more fragmented, right? Like, just like streaming platforms for a long time were just Netflix, and then you sort of had Netflix and Hulu, and I was like, everyone is like, Disney, you want it, it's like there's like a million, I think this is a market that could fragment very fast, despite the high cost in it, because owning the pipes is so valuable. So I don't know, what do you think about it? Like, what do you take away?
I mean, it's interesting because all this data actually surfaced because of the Epic Apple lawsuit, right? And I think Apple's play here is they're saying, look, and in some ways it's clever, right? Because I think the lawyers, the path they're taking is, it's not easy to build a platform. Look how much even Epic is spending to build out their own distribution, and how much money they're losing to build out their own distribution. And therefore, Apple's App Store should have the same respect, right? And in some ways, I think the Apple lawyers here are just incredibly clever, because they're catching Tim like with his own ego, right? By him saying, yes, it's an investment, I'm okay losing money on the store, blah, blah, blah. He's essentially saying it requires hundreds of millions of dollars to build out distribution for games. And then Apple will go,
interesting.
And then Apple will go, aha, you see?
Yeah.
See, this is why.
And if you had to do it for mobile, it would have cost you a bunch of money too, right? So, yeah, maybe you should. That's actually a really interesting point. Yeah.
And it's interesting because there's two opinions in this article that are expressed. According to Apple, right, when they do all the calculations, the Epic Game Store is going to cost Epic $600 million in losses by the end of this year. That includes the exclusives, the free games, and all the other expenses. And according to Apple, the Epic Game Store won't be profitable until 2027.
Okay.
When you ask Tim Sweeney says, even with our 12% revenue cut, we're going to start turning a profit in 2023. So, like, there's this big gap between what Apple is saying this platform is really costing Epic, and what Epic is saying this platform is costing Epic. I think what I'm most amazed at is any investor would write a check here at a 50% valuation increase over the last round, which was not that long ago, without having sort of sorted all this out. Are you not surprised that investors were not scared away by this? Like, this was not a small round either. They raised $1 billion. When you have so much uncertainty swirling around this lawsuit, Apple clearly not going anywhere, and potentially up to 600 million in losses by the end of the year on the Epic Games Store. If I'm an investor who just put $1 billion, I'm going, geez, my $1 billion probably not going to last that long.
Yeah. It's not a lot of not a lot of gas in the tank for the road trip, you know. It's I hear you, right? I hear you, but I also think it comes down to, okay, yes, there's a lot of uncertainty in this for sure, right? But they're building something of value in a platform business in a market that everybody agrees is going to have a ton of value, games distribution, right? So the money, even if they're burning a bunch of money, money's going to the right place. Like, you're burning the money in the right furnace, you know? Fortnite, still an absolute phenomenon, right? Unreal Engine, still an industry defining engine, right? Like, I'm surprised you got a 50% valuation lift from last round, but I find it difficult to dispute. Like, Epic is a good company with good assets, and broadly, other than what feels like a strategic misstep with this App Store challenge, I think broadly a really sound strategic strategy, right? Like, they did the thing Valve did, which made Valve into what it is today, which is you parlay a hit game and an engine into a distribution platform. And like, it's a perfect recipe for success. And I think they were smart enough to see it and be like, oh, we can do that too. And, and they're continuing to spend into those strengths, right? Like, you don't see them panicking and doing all sorts of weird other stuff, or, launching new business units or event. Like, they have conviction around the path they're pursuing. So yeah, I mean, again, I don't know what justifies the 50%. I don't know what 50% good news happened between the last round and this round, but it's also tough to criticize what I think is underlying this a very fundamentally strong business.
What's interesting, William, I just want to come back to this, right? You're right. They're following the Valve playbook.
Yep.
To a T, right?
Literally, Valve is Source Engine, Half-Life, Steam. This is Unreal Engine, Fortnite, Epic Game Store. Like, I couldn't make it clearer.
What's different is, I don't think, not to my knowledge, I don't think Valve ever spent hundreds of millions of dollars in freebies and exclusives and God knows what. And and you're going to say, but, Epic Games is wasn't first to the race, so that to compete they have to do this. But that changes the equation then, right?
Well,
like, it's one thing to say they're following the playbook. The playbook has been proven to work, and so therefore the success is guaranteed here. I'm exaggerating a bit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But they're not. They're following the playbook, but with a slight variation that I think is somewhat significant here, which is the hundreds of millions of dollars they're spending that Valve never spent.
Well, yes,
like,
I agree.
Does the world really need Epic Games Store when you have Steam? That to me is not obvious. Not obvious. Yes.
Well, but did the world need Netflix? Did the world need Disney Plus when you could get Disney movies back in the day on Netflix? Like, I mean, you in principle.
If I had the choice, I would have rather have everything on Netflix. If you're asking me.
Yeah, I get it, but no, I mean, in principle, look, like. Well, I don't want to talk about the second one, because the second one is a little more boring to me than the first point you raised, which is Steam didn't have to, or Valve didn't have to spend all this money on it, right? And the counterpoint that you're right that I was going to make is, but they were first. They created the market. There is a significant first mover advantage in these platform industries. So that doesn't mean you're silly to spend a ton of money to follow, because if it's a great space, doesn't matter that the other guy got it cheaply. You should try to get it too. The thing that kind of ties back to the point I was saying earlier about, but how does the space continue to evolve? Because these sorts of losses make sense when you think there might be 2 or 3 players in the marketplace. But does it make sense when literally there's a Microsoft game store and a, CD Projekt? Well, there is a CD Projekt Games where it's GOG, you know what I mean? But does it make sense when when there's an Amazon game store, when there is a, I'm making it up. Like, I don't know, what's another major publisher that has, I mean, all of these guys have done things like game passports and everything, like, everybody's looked and experimented with edges of this space here. And I think paradoxically, as the space becomes more fragmented, it also gets easier to enter, right? Because it's a huge pain to go from having one game launching service to 2. And now my library is bifurcated and, oh, come on. But when there's 5 game launching services you already have, you're sort of trained that that's just what you do, and going to the 6th isn't that much of a headache. And I think you probably felt that intuitively for our listeners with streaming services, right? The barrier to get you to sign up for that second streaming service was really hard. But as soon as you were on that second streaming service, like, oh yeah, whatever, Peacock, sure. Like, I don't care, like it's because you've already incurred the shoelace costs of not having a single sourced market, right? And a single source discovery engine. So it gets that much cheaper every time, or the shoelace cost for the consumer is that much lower every time to introduce another marketplace or engine or platform.
William, let me just ask one last question on this. And I will give you my own anecdotal sort of view here, which is, I use Steam to buy games.
Sure you do.
If I need to play Fortnite, I fire up Epic Game Store, which is never. And if they have a free game I open it to go get it. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I buy my games on Steam, right? There's really no reason for me to go buy them on Epic Game Store because it just splits my library. Yeah. So unless I'm going and getting a free game or I'm playing Fortnite, I don't really go there. And I suspect... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that was my question, is for that 56 million MAU they quote, what is that absent Fortnite, absent free games, right? Yeah. So in other words, what is the true induced incremental purchased consumer? That's the number you want to see. I suspect that
number is low. Is my assumption. I suspect that number is low. So let me put William, the CEO of Epic Games, hat on. Okay?
Sure, yeah.
And I will put my Paul, I'm an investor in Epic Games hat on. And let's both of us ask ourselves, I think, what is a very simple question, which is the $600 million $600 million in losses that Epic will take on the Epic Game Store, right, to date. Mm-hmm. Could we have spent that $600 million making the Epic Game Store like just so much better than Steam? In I don't know what ways. Like I'm sure you and I could come up with 10 ways we could make Steam better. But you know what I mean? Could we have spent 1/10 of that to make the product so vastly better than Steam versus try to buy this audience that I don't think will have any loyalty beyond the free games? Like, because fundamentally, in my mind, Epic Games Store is an inferior product to Steam. It lacks many of the features. It feels a little newer from an interface perspective, but it's actually pretty clunky. It's considerably clunkier than Steam. It's slower than Steam.
Although Steam's not great either,
it's
Paul.
Not.
I mean, like,
but at least you can, like, you have game reviews and things that, like, for
yeah,
a while
but I also feel
exist.
A lot of why you think Steam isn't clunky is because you're so used to Steam. You're like,
I think Steam is clunky, but my point is, like, Epic Game Store was not like was definitely not the, oh my God, this is what modern software should look and feel like. Right?
Yeah. So your question is, could we have spent $600 million better than this?
Yeah,
right?
Than just buying an audience.
Yeah, well, what could you have done differently? And the answer is, could you have put $600 million into game dev? Like what would be the analogy here? You could have had, you're gonna have to have some baseline.
You could have built another Fortnite for that money.
Could you have done $200 million into platform advertising costs and marketing, which is still a massive number, right? A massive number. And could you have done $200 million into 2 additional content exclusive studios that are only Epic Game Store, right? Yeah, it's interesting, and if one of those studios made another Fortnite, you would look so smart, right? You'd look like you're on the best strategy ever. And if both of those games turns into, I don't know what's a high profile failure we've had recently, like Cyberpunk, right? You'd look pretty terrible. I think there were higher risk strategies they could have pursued that maybe would have had a higher return and maybe even more effectively cracked open the market. But I find it difficult to fault this approach. If I'd been CEO, I probably would have gone with a pay-to-play strategy here, because it's just, you're shaking your head. You're like, you're such an idiot, William. You're like,
no,
yeah.
I wouldn't have done that. I think Tim's ego has got in the way of good decision-making. He's a multi-billionaire.
What would you have done? What would you have done?
I think your points were great. Spend some money, a little bit. I don't even know if I would have spent 200, 50 million on marketing our new store. I would have put maybe 50 million more into building out a feature set and product that is so vastly better than Steam that people have a real reason to switch, and more importantly, to stay, because today there's zero other than the freebies.
Mm.
And then the rest, you're absolutely right. I would have gone and bought myself maybe 2 or 3 new whacks at an interesting game.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's weird to me to spend hundreds of millions of your investor dollars to buy an audience that we don't really know what the value is, unless this is ego driven.
Well,
and his whole demeanor with Apple is ego driven. This whole oh my God, Epic Game Store's so great is ego driven.
This is a good discussion. Isn't the lesson from Valve though? Because I think we all agree Valve looks pretty smart, right? And I'm lucky. Whatever. Right? Yeah, but they whatever they've done, they seem to have done it well. And yeah, you'd probably wish Valve did something, behave differently in some ways in market and everything. And I think they arguably could have been an even bigger success than they were if they hadn't been sometimes so, managed in secrecy, right? But they've done pretty well, right? And I think the one thing we've seen, I think one of the geniuses of Valve is they sort of got out of the making games business. You know what I mean? And I think probably what they saw a little bit internally is, wow, this is really scary. It's really hit driven. It's really expensive, right? There's huge, even when you have a AAA team working on an iconic property, the risk of failure is high. They saw what happened. Half-Life 3, it's the obvious thing. We still don't have it for a reason. I think part of the reason is they parlayed success in games into a more sustainable business model, which is success in games distribution. I'd kind of liken this to pro gamers, right? Parlaying success in tournaments into subscribers on Twitch, right? They kind of got out of the lumpy, uncertain, you could win a ton more and it could be amazing. And World Championship 2020, it's a free check. They got out of that business model into the reliable, stable, and still highly lucrative recurring model. And I think Valve was smart to do that. Now, in Valve's case, I think they could have managed to make a few more games alongside all of that stuff. I think we could have had Half-Life 3 or at least Half-Life 2 Episode 3 by now. But
Counter-Strike, something.
Counter anything. Yeah, come on, guys. We could have. But
your point's a good one, William. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The point being is that it's business model evolution. Isn't what these guys trying to do, wouldn't somebody like me look at them and say, they're so smart to be getting out of that business model, leave the hit-driven business for the next generation of companies that have to take those risks. We're positioned to move into a stable platform business. Let's go do it.
Yeah, it just doesn't fit the narrative they're putting out there, right? Which is, we're building the metaverse. Okay, you don't think $600 million could have gone to help forward their metaverse vision that's not buying audience for Epic Game Store that will probably disappear when Fortnite goes away and when the freebies go away? What have you built for that $600 million? And I think that Epic vastly overestimates what they got from that. And I think they're going to be really disappointed when the song ends here and they're left with no real loyalty. You don't think they could have gone and built a marketplace the same way Steam has, so people can trade Fortnite cosmetics and items and stuff and take a cut? I mean, isn't this one of the biggest sources of Steam revenue? Why wouldn't you go do that? And tie it into NFTs or you're Tim Sweeney, he's the technical genius everyone says he is.
Yep.
Where is the brain interface where I can play Fortnite with my thoughts? Where is you keep talking about metaverse, put your money where your mouth is, they're not. You're
going to the bigger point here, which is the Epic Game Store is not a metaverse, right? The thing you could have argued is, could they have looked at this a different way entirely and said, who cares who owns the distribution platform now, right? That's like owning telephone lines today. Yeah. It looks like a great business when telephones are cool, but guess what? It's a cellular world that's coming. We're going to move. Could they have really gone next gen and supplanted themselves on? Because I agree with you that the current ways games are distributed probably won't look the same when there's another massive platform technology shift. And a lot of the entrenchment they're getting right now is assuming that the world today will look like the world in 2027 when they're positioned to reap these rewards. So yeah, again, also a higher risk strategy, building an unproven technical metaverse. And I know it's what they like to talk about, but higher risk, right? So, yeah, my whole thing on this is, look, you would like to have seen, I guess, talking to you about it, you would like to have seen, I guess it would be more entertaining to see more risk that the company has taken in terms of how particularly given how they just own the game zeitgeist. I mean, just how powerful Fortnite was and what it can still be, I think, as like a unifying property. You maybe would have want to see some more ambitious around what that could be beyond building what the next door neighbors have. That being said, they picked a pretty good next door neighbor to copy the house off. You know what I mean? Like, you can't fault them. They picked, if you were going to say, build me a house that's just like that neighbor's house, they picked exactly the right neighbor to build, you know?
I will say this, William, and here's my hot take. The
Yep.
Epic Game Store will go down, I think, probably in the top 10 list of worst investments in gaming of all time. That it will go down that bad, because I don't think they're really going to get out of it what they want to get out of it. And I also think it's just so easy to compete if you're Valve or Steam and you realize Epic Game Store is getting any traction, and just saying, okay, we're going to bring our cut down from 20 to 12, and now it's a race to zero in terms of margins, right? Because at the end of the day, mostly that's what the developer cares about, assuming both platforms have large audiences anyways. And so you end up with this race to zero. You're a middleman. There's not much value there. You've wasted hundreds of millions of dollars, and you haven't delivered on the promise that you're putting out to the world, which is we're building the metaverse. In my mind right now, Tim Sweeney's ego is driving Epic off a cliff. So my hot take is Epic Game Store will go down as probably one of the worst investments.
That's a hot take, Paul. That's a hot take. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I think it's an interesting point to end on, is the race to zero. And that sort of ties to the other thing I was saying about how many competitors can the market sustain. Because you're right, the next competitor comes in at 10. Then you're no longer low cost at 12, so you have to go to, right? And then the next guy comes in at 8, and then someone else comes in at 9, but they have, it is the risk with these highly competitive markets is you trend towards perfect competition, and perfect competition means your profit margins erode to zero. Now, obviously that's a gross overstatement. You won't get there here, but that's exactly the risk you're seeing as the competitive pressures mount. Anyway, Next topic. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
This topic, William, I know is near and dear to your heart here. Very near and dear to your heart here. Much more, way more about this than I do.
No, I don't. That's not true.
As with most things in gaming. And this is from Inverse.com, and the headline here is Xbox Kojima deal, abandoned PS5 game sparks a captivating rumor. So let me just back up here and give some context. In late 2020, there were rumors that Kojima Productions was developing a game called Silent Hills for PlayStation 5. That game, for whatever reason, sort of went nowhere. I don't know what happened to it. And more rumors began when Sony released a blog post talking about a new game called Abandoned. It was supposed to be a first-person survival shooter, and there was a trailer, and it was scheduled to launch Q4 of this year, 2021. Now, all of the people who heard this rumor started speculating that this was Kojima's latest project, this game called Abandoned, because it had a lot of similarities to a horror project that he was working on that was canceled when he moved to his own studio. But what ended up happening now is, and this is where you got to put your tinfoil hat on, that Kojima couldn't be making a PS5 game, or this PS5 game, because supposedly he's in talks with Microsoft about an exclusive with Microsoft. And the reason people believe this is because Phil Spencer did a live stream or a video in February, and on his shelf he had the statue, essentially the logo of Kojima Productions. And I didn't know this either. Supposedly Phil Spencer has a history of teasing announcements from his bookshelf. Like, supposedly he hid an Xbox Series S on his bookshelf before it came out. He had an Xbox wireless headset on his bookshelf before it was announced. And so there's this Kojima reference on his bookshelf, and now there is some belief that Kojima is now moved to Xbox, that he will be making an Xbox exclusive game, and that all the work he's done with Sony and PlayStation are not going to happen. Now, all of this is also backed up by the fact that supposedly Microsoft has a huge desire to get more into Japanese gaming. They want to buy Sega. They potentially want to buy Konami. They want, right? Like they're looking at buying these Japanese development studios. What do you think of these rumors? Why?
Well,
is this? I feel like this is the TMZ or like it's like rumors.
It is a bit ridiculous because I was looking at Phil Spencer's bookshelf that you put up. He has a Switch there. Does that mean they're buying Nintendo? Like like
it's true.
Like. Come on, like
Maybe.
guys. Yeah, maybe it's the biggest. Maybe we're all dumb. We were so focused on the Kojima Studios mascot, we missed the fact that they're acquiring Nintendo.
There seems to be a Connect 4 there too. Wasn't that a Hasbro game, or was that not?
I actually have no. I don't even remember who makes Connect 4, but that was a classic game for sure. Yeah. What was I gonna say? So the thing for me about this that's interesting has kind of nothing to do with the actual details of the story at all.
Fair.
Because
Okay.
the details of the story sort of don't matter, right? This is a bit of a like, he said, she said, ooh, maybe he's making it, maybe he's not. Like, wouldn't it be cool if, oh, I hope that's the same game. I liked the trailer for that game, the playable trailer that came out, like all that stuff, right? The thing I think is interesting about the story is this is real. This is a rare instance in the game industry where you have the game creator, a clear individual creator, commanding so much cult status and power, right? Because this story is about Hideo Kojima. And it's basically like Hideo Kojima is such a big deal. Who wants Kojima? Sony, yeah. Microsoft, yeah. Oh, any other people too? So that's what I think is really interesting about this is why don't we see more gaming? Because it's basically Kojima and Miyamoto. And that's it, right? Like there aren't many other like game developers. I mean, I can name some like Corey. I think it's Corey Balog, the guy who did the God of War. I'm like, that guy's amazing, right? Like I can name some people, but I don't think they're like household names. You know what I mean? And not in the same way that Kojima is talent here. And so it's like why isn't there more of this? And is this a trend we're going to see more of where specific studio heads or game developers are poached and hunted? You know what I mean?
It's such a good, so insightful, William. And let me just take it back because I feel like there's almost Book of Esports kind of like chapter here, which is it a cycle? Because you're right, there's no cult of personality really around game developers right now, right? Not the same way you have streamers or other influencers.
No,
and you'd think it would be because the games
or even movie studio producers like Steven Spielberg, right?
But gaming used to be like that, which is interesting, right? It was Sid Meier's Civilization,
John Romero, right?
Carmack, there were these cults of personality around incredible developers. Why do you think that has gone away is my question. Or why do you think it's more limited now?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think it, bluntly, right? I think, and this is a real working theory here, so like, don't judge me, but I think it comes down to the innovation cycle in the genre. Because why is Kojima so famous? Because we attach Metal Gear Solid to Kojima, right? That's what it is, right? Like he birthed that property, right? Miyamoto, why is Miyamoto so famous? Zelda and Mario, right? Like defining properties. I think it's also fair if you go back to the people you're discussing, like Sid Meier's equates with Civilization, John Romero equates with Daikatana. Sorry, John. Like
or Quake or
Quake. I was making a Daikatana joke, yes. But yeah, Quake is the. But the point is, like, I think maybe the way you get to this cult status is when you're creating IP, and I think the IP cycles have slowed today, right? There just isn't the same quantity of AAA IP coming to market that there was historically, right? We've talked about this for other reasons we're moving to a more sequel driven sustainability, franchised model. But that also means like, you don't really remember the person who directed Home Alone 3, right? But Home Alone, like, even if Home Alone 3 is a very good movie, I have no idea. I've never seen it. I mean, maybe, probably not, but maybe, But the point is, like, you just don't get the same credit and you don't develop the same status for doing a great job sequeling something, And it is interesting that when I do think of the game developers that, I have respect for, it's always around the new IP they've created, right? Like Looking Glass Studios and Thief. I mean, like, come on, like what a moment, right? Or like, it was Cory Barlog, I think is the guy I wanted to reference, and like, that's not a new IP, but the way he re-envisioned God of War, and look, I'm a huge fan of the God of War re-envisioning. That's controversial, but I think it's a wonderful step for the franchise. Like, the point is it's associated with freshness. And I think we've had to move to studios as the building block because it's really more about how do we churn out another version of this game every year and not individuals where it's a creative vision that's unique and relatively, freestanding. Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. From a business standpoint, the studios have gotten bigger, the teams are bigger, the dollars are bigger, the timelines are longer. And so you're right. I mean, there's just less opportunity for an individual to really shine. Also,
what matters more is the machine and less the artist, which sounds very depressing. And I don't mean it to sound that way, but that's like the simple metaphor here.
But what I want to get at here, and I think where in my mind, this is really interesting is like, is this maybe why we're not seeing, like, which one's the chicken and which one's the egg? Are we not seeing great games anymore? Because I truly believe gaming has stalled a little bit in terms of innovation from a game standpoint. More people playing, industry growing, all those good things. But meaning the hardcore PC gamer in me has not seen sort of great evolution from the game standpoint. Mm-hmm. And is it because we're not elevating, artists, developers like to greatness and creating cult of personality around people with big ideas? And instead of just looking at all these studios like machines pumping out the next, sequel to whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's also just true a reality, I think, is like you can even think of like, so what's a game that's been a huge hit for you recently? Valheim, right?
Yeah, although, that was like 2 or 3 weeks of gaming. And
but like, I mean, could you name the creative team behind Valheim? I mean, the point I'm making too is like, it might also be there was a generational gap where games were really made by very few people, and now it's just impossible. Even if you're an indie game, it's like really hard to make it with fewer than 20 folks, and as a result of that, the names that we remember, it's just much harder to break out and have your individual contribution matter that much. Right. But it's also, I do also wonder too, if there's a swing back coming because it's getting so expensive to buy these studios, right? Like the prices are not cheap anymore, but could you get, some of the key talent? And then that, to some extent, right, that was sort of Amazon's strategy with what they were trying to do, I think, with their, I don't know if they're really, but they were looking for games industry people, right? I can't remember anyway. But like maybe there will be a backswing and we'll see. And that's what's interesting about this whole Kojima story is not like, is Kojima going to make a game for Microsoft or Sony? Like, I don't, I'm a huge Kojima fan, so don't get this the wrong way, but like, who cares? He's going to keep making games. They'll be very good. Although Death Stranding was not a game, it was really just more of a weirdly uninteractive walking movie, but whatever. I still enjoyed parts of it. That's not the question. The question is like, what does this mean for our industry? And does this mean that individual creators will exert more power, or is this a relic of an older age, Yeah,
I mean, it'll be interesting to watch. I think it'll be good for the industry if game developers, again, go back to this cycle of having, big personalities at the head driving big visions. Like, to me, that's a good thing. We need more Sid Meier's and more,
We got to talk about that because that is still... That's like the thing missing in every part of gaming today. Like, we have a lot of I'm trying to say this the right way. We have a lot of great streamers. This isn't a critique of streamers, right? At all. Like there's phenomenal streamers, super talented people, but like the big crazy breakout personalities that are just so off, like, we've talked about before how that's why someone like Dr. Disrespect really feels unique in the market and is able to carve something out. Like, yep. I think the same is true of sort of, to some extent, the studios, right? Is like, I think there is an opportunity for some real auteurship here, and by the way, that's something the Japanese studios are, still sort of have. They still have these sort of and this is maybe a myopic view. I could be wrong about this, but based on my understanding, like you still have really, unique personalities. Like, sorry, who's the guy who made Nier? Like the person responsible for Nier. Let me just or more importantly, like Nier Automata, which I thought was an absolutely brilliant game. Like, it's that studio guy, in my understanding, is more of an unbelievable personality. Like he does interviews with weird hats on and but it's like, it's driving a little bit of, it's taking the actions that encourage people to build the celebrity affinity,
Yep. William, quickly before we move on to our last story, just 2 words here. The single fastest growing area of gaming and esports, guys, is betting. It's gambling. It's booming right now. You don't need to be a prophet like me to see that. However, as an investor, you guys know I've stayed away from that because of the risk and the shady nature of the companies involved. That's been true up until now. There's a public company called Esports Entertainment Group, or EEG. They're focused on esports entertainment and betting. They're NASDAQ listed. They're fully regulated. This is the kind of blue chip company you really want to bet on if you're looking at the esports entertainment and betting space at all from an investor standpoint. So if you're a family office, institutional investor of any kind, check out esportsentertainmentgroup.com. The ticker symbol is GMBL. And really, this is one of the best ways to get exposure to the space. Having said that, it's just my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor. I'm not selling stock in the company. Do your own research and seek advice from a licensed professional if you're looking to invest. Our last story here, William, and look, we could probably spend a ton of time on this. We won't, but this is a pretty big story, I think.
Can't wait.
And this was from pocketgamer.com, and it was ESL Gaming to feature new division exclusive to mobile esports. So ESL Gaming, for everyone knows, they're big tournament. They put on big tournaments, and they produce esports tournaments, and they broadcast esports tournaments. They are going to bring mobile esports coverage to 80 countries and all the games and all, to all their audience, basically. And they're going to have essentially now their general manager of mobile at ESL Gaming. So they're looking at mobile gaming in a very serious way. They're going to focus on games like Brawl Stars, League of Legends Wild Rift, Legends of Runeterra, all of the most popular games, really. William, we've talked about mobile so much now.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
And the mobile gaming studios are making zillions of dollars. Right?
Yes, they are
raising hundreds of millions, billions. They're making hundreds of millions or billions. They're going public at multi-billion valuations.
We literally cut mobile game valuation and raise stories all the time from podcasters. Like, we just can't do another one. Like, there's a lot more than what we cover. Yeah.
But this felt somewhat significant because, I think mobile esports are a challenge, I personally believe, even though mobile gaming is huge. Do you think ESL will be able to make mobile esports entertaining enough to have a long-term sustainable future?
I don't know, but I'm happy to see them try. It's such a huge market. It's the way so many people game. They deserve to have a content pipeline, right? I also think just the mobile space is the quality of game and the competitive nature of the games have elevated really significantly. The classic example is Riot. Like, we now see Riot with Wild Rift in there, that's the obvious thing because it's recent, but it's been a historic trend. I hope they can do it because I think that audience deserves to see their pastime celebrated, right? At the same time, just because there's a wide audience playing something doesn't always mean there's a wide audience viewing something, right? And in this case, I actually think there is. It's a fair comparison. It's a smart move. But I would point out that I can think of many, many things that lots and lots of people play that aren't, that aren't broadcast 24/7. So there is some risk here, but just the numbers are so big in mobile. Like, how how can you not go for this? Like that was my overwhelming take when I read this article is like, look, the valuations are huge. The player base is so huge. You have some struggles in your core market because, publishers and other entities are taking production in-house or, other things, right? Like, why would you not go for this big greenfield market where your brand has a lot of power and credibility and you can plant a flag? That was my thought.
Do you think we'll see the space get very competitive very quickly? Like, will we see DreamHack, and I think ESL and DreamHack are the same company now, but like DreamHack and EGL and all the big tournament providers, do you think we'll see this sort of deluge now of mobile, tournament provider and like with bigger names, right? And bigger production value and more, a focus on more entertainment, which look, I still don't think is going to save mobile esports, but do you think we're going to see a deluge of this kind of stuff?
I would think let's see what ESL does, and then just like there was a deluge into the traditional markets, right? Like I think see what happens. It's still early days, but look, if the viewership audience is there will be lots of people trying to capture that viewership audience, plain and simple. The interesting question for you, Paul, is the thing that you always raise, which is your reservations about mobile esports, which I don't share, but it is a very real concern when you note that, softball may be an amazing sport, but we generally accept that baseball's the stick and ball sport that gets broadcast, right? Do you in a same situation here,
the comparison I make is T-ball to baseball, but
that might, yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's, I don't want to rehash that argument, but I think it's really good to see people developing the space, because also all of these things, I think we miss sometimes how the competitive scene in esports grew up with the viewership scene, right? Like the fact that there was viewership enhanced the competitiveness, and the fact that there was competitiveness enhanced the viewership. Like the businesses we have today probably couldn't have existed if they hadn't matured alongside streaming platforms like Twitch, just because it's a very symbiotic relationship. So you're going to need that same symbiosis for mobile to move the same way.
The way I look at this, William, and just to be clear, like I believe mobile gaming is a massive opportunity. The audiences are huge, the dollars are huge. What I'm talking about is really mobile esports as a spectator sport, right? Where I've had serious reservations because I just don't think the skill level's there and the entertainment level is there. And what I like about this story is ESL's either going to make this work or they won't, right? But in some ways that will settle the argument, because if ESL can't make it work, probably it's a waste of time for anyone else, right? If ESL can make it work, well then, okay, maybe they figured something out. Maybe so much of the player audience translates to esports that it doesn't matter how entertaining it is, right? When you have 3 billion players, like if only 30 million move over, you still have a bigger audience than all the other esports combined, right? Or they figure out, they crack sort of the entertainment nut and droves of people go and watch. And I like that in some ways this will settle the question.
Very smart, Paul. Yeah, I agree with you. I take that point. It is true that when you have a major player move in and make an attempt like ESL, it's going to be a very strong barometer for the underlying health of the space, right? Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, in general, I think, we need to kind of keep our watch list, but the mobile esports, I think this is going to be a big one to watch in 2020 and 2021. Like there's going to be, numbers are too big, too much motion right now with ESL coming in and other things. Like I think it'll be a big, question mark on the industry coming up.
William, on that note, that wraps up this week's podcast.
Wow.
I just want to remind people, make sure, guys, follow us everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. It's either Biz Esports or Business of Esports everywhere. Every Wednesday evening, as William mentioned earlier in the podcast, we do a live stream. It's a lot of fun. We do it after we tape this podcast. There's a bigger cast. We answer your questions live. We talk. It's an open, much more open discussion. We cover all the stuff that didn't fit into the podcast every Wednesday evening, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. You can find us there on YouTube live, LinkedIn live, Twitter/Periscope, just about anywhere you get live streams, you can find us. And don't forget, if you bought the Book of Esports, first of all, if you haven't bought it, go buy it. If you did buy it, or if you just bought it, read it quickly, and then go leave a review on Amazon. and tell William how much you loved his book, because it
means
really
a
is
lot, guys. It means a ton. Yeah, please,
it really
please
is
do that.
by far the greatest book in the space. And I call it really required reading for just about anyone looking to get into the esports industry, or even dabble, or who is even interested in it. You have to read this book before you do anything in the space. Guys, that wraps up this week's podcast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for telling your friends about the podcast. Thank you for leaving those 5-star ratings and reviews. William, thank you as always. And
Absolute
we will see
pleasure.
you guys next week.